Hi, I'm Tony Riddle, and this is the Nat Life Pod, a platform for conversation to help close the gap between wellness as an industry and wellness as a state of being.
Now, there's a lot of buzz around off-grid living in community, rewilding, foraging, regen, and wild tending at the moment. And so I feel we need the voices of those that are truly embodied to learn from. So it's with great pleasure I get to introduce my next guest, Tasha, who is definitely one of those wise voices. Tasha is a mixed-race English Central American woman with a Buddhist spiritual practice. She has been the visionary of many projects and is a true creative force working with community, wild food, wild tending, food production, and farming to address some of the core issues of our time. Her work is rooted in continuous learning and intuitive feeling to explore and continuously develop methodologies and product development, creating food systems that work in harmony with nature through developing agri-wilding landscapes and products that draw on ancient or indigenous understandings of land, food, and medicine. Now, there's so much that Tasha can speak to from a real place of knowing, and this conversation is a great intro to Tasha, and my hope is for her to come back on the Nat Life Pod to share some more of her wisdom. Now, I hope you enjoy this wild chat as much as we did. Now, before you get this conversation in your ears, I'm going to introduce you to what feels to me a great partnership. Are you looking to take your strength conditioning to new heights? I'm often asked how I maintain my physique. Surely it can't just be from all those crawling patterns, Tony. Well, it's actually largely my own bodyweight practices, so yes, crawling is in there, but I'm a massive fan of bodyweight training, and my go-to for my upper body strength is the gymnastic rings, or more specifically the gymnastic ring muscle-up. When I first introduced gymnastic ring muscle-ups to my own movement practice some 16 years ago, my upper body was transformed into an undeniably different, far healthier natural shape, and I found myself in the possession of an entirely new type of humble strength. I now revisit the muscle-up 3 to 4 times per week as part of my maintenance movement program, and find that even into what is now the start of my 50th year on this planet, I'm still connected to that humble strength. So I decided to launch a simple no-nonsense gymnastic ring muscle-up tutorial, which you will find the details of in the show notes, and have partnered with Gravity Fitness, which are the ultimate destination for calisthenics kit for the gym, home and on the go, and are my recommended go-to for durable gymnastic rings. So if you're looking to gain a newfound strength, check out my muscle-up tutorial and use the Gravity Fitness discount code TheNaturalLifestylist for 10% off all Gravity Fitness kit. Get your rings set up and start your humbling strength journey. Hey Tasha.
Hi Tony.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, it's me. Yeah, it's your home more than my home. So we're at 42 Acres, where we met. Great space.
Yeah.
Love it
Beautiful
here.
place.
You know?
We did a bit of lockdown together, didn't we?
We did. I was about to go to that. That was it. That was the connection piece, really, I guess. Because I knew you and knew you on the land, but it's actually when you get to really spend time with people and you really get to know them, don't you? And what was lovely is because the kids got to hang out, right? And so Lola and Millie would come back with something, and what was one of them that blew my mind? I think it was the holly. You know, Papa, holly is our native caffeine, like yerba mate, you know? Right?
Yeah, it is.
And so we were suddenly thrust into that world quite quickly.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And we were just speaking off mic about the embodiment, right? So I want to speak to that for a moment because, like foraging, for instance, as an experience. So I held a retreat here when I launched my book, and we called it Be More Human. After the book, the retreat, Be More Human. If you haven't heard of my book already, Be More Human. Available on all platforms, and we had a foraging component of that. And so to start that, I took them into the woods and blindfolded, and we went for a sensory practice, right? And then from the sensory practice, here you go, Tasha. And Tom, who I was voicing earlier, who's a massive fan of yours, he has a woodland that they're kind of rewilding, and it was great for him. He just said it was so beautiful to spend time with someone that is really, really, it's not the knowledge as we perceive the knowledge, like the information rich, the academic, here's a plant. Again, it was the real embodiment, the knowledge, like the real knowing.
Yeah.
He said it was so smooth. It was just like lovely to be in that joyful presence around the plants.
Yeah. I a few years ago, I sort of scrapped having any kind of script. And now I don't plan when I teach. I just let the plants let me know if they would like to come forward. And it's been really fun doing that. For me, it felt more on the edge. But I've been here on this land for 7 years, thereabouts. And I've lived here as well, in this building when it was more of a ruin.
Yeah, I remember those days.
Yeah. And
the haunted house.
well, and the house full of bees, right?
Yeah.
Like the walls would hum because there were wild honeybees living in the walls, which we've managed to rescue and put in the apiary. So they're still here. And I feel during that time specifically, actually, was when I went on to a deeper learning journey with the plants and with the creatures and the beavers, and kind of really was with what was here and myself as part of that ecosystem, and intuited another wild colony on the other side of the land, and I could hear them from, I think it was like 50 paces away. So there wasn't actually sound, but I could feel them, feel their presence. And it really gave me more of an insight into how it must be to be living from a more indigenous cosmological perspective when land starts to speak to you in a deeper way. And I think lockdown was incredible for that. And I also, as you know, was living off grid for something like 13 years before I was here. So I feel like I've been privileged to see sort of levels of, I want to say secrets, but that makes it sound exclusive. But I suppose I feel
privy to it,
privileged to whispers, and we were talking about the quietening of the mind in order to receive that, and I feel really blessed because having had such a long-term relationship with land, I've been allowed to feel more, which has allowed me to feel more at ease, really, I think, with life, and comforted by the amount of medicine and food and sort of support there is around me, which is kind of the opposite of the scarcity mindset of capitalism, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And I really notice the difference when we're coming from an abundance mindset, or like a feeling of I am more than enough, I have more than enough.
I am all of this.
Yeah, I am all of this, and all of this is me.
I've just had, first we had 2 podcasts, one with Zach Bush and one with Jess. With Zachy B. I'm going to call him Zachy B because I'm a mate now. All right, Zachy B. Dr. Zachy B. Talking to how nature speaks through us.
Yes.
Yeah, that it's when we're really in that place, I guess, when we step aside and allow it to come through, a bit like conversations like this, as we were speaking to earlier, because it can be a bit little pangs of anxiety when it comes to getting a mic out, but once you can actually let that to one, now stuff starts to come through, and we can speak to more of through the embodiment rather than trying to recite facts, right? It's a really nice position to get to, and that's quite some journey to get to that place.
Yes.
I found also being here in that period of time that shall not be named, that I'd come and sit at the lake, and I'd walk in the morning, I'd sit and I'd have my matcha by the water, and I'd do some breath, and in the breath suddenly I could hear all kinds of things coming in because I'd properly tuned in, rather than I'm walking to the lake and I'm sipping my tea, like the doing brain. But once I really got into the being part, that was the stepping aside where then nature not only speaking through me, but I am part of the voice that's speaking through it, because it's all interdependent. Otherwise, again, there's still an I in there when we say nature is speaking through us, right? Whereas it's all us, isn't it? But again, it takes time. So let's rewind selector and get back to, because I know you lived off grid for a period of time, but my listeners won't, right?
Yeah, sure.
Our listeners, right? So what did that look like, and how did that shape? How did it form? When did it start?
Well, I went off grid when I was about 23. That was following having spent a year traveling around the world when I was 19 on my own, and spending a lot of time with indigenous communities, possibly maybe 30 or 40 different indigenous communities.
I love how you just started smiling like, when I was 19, I went traveling. Yeah.
Well, I think, I'm the daughter of two people that had to leave their country because of war.
Yeah.
And so my mother's English, my father's Nicaraguan, and they were living in Nicaragua in the 80s, and they worked for the Sandinista revolution, and that's how they met. And sadly, my mother was ebbing towards 40 and desperately wanted children, and there'd been one civil war and another one was coming, and basically they took the really hard decision that if they wanted to have children in peace, that they would need to leave. And so oddly, I was born in a council estate in London, really confused about why I was born there, which I have never met anyone else who said I didn't understand why I was born where I was born. But all I remember is just being like, why do people live like this? I don't get it. Why is everyone, I remember thinking, why has everyone got separate toilets? And why do we not eat together? And why does everyone have several toilets? And I remember finding the city super confusing and finding a lot of comfort in sitting by the River Thames, near where I grew up, and watching the boatie community and eating blackberries. That was like my favorite thing to do. And that informed my desire to leave modern life as soon as I could. So when I was 19 and I'd saved the money to travel, it was this really big moment for me, because I was so desperate to find what it is that I knew inside of me but had never seen on the outside, really. And I found it. And
then it became obvious.
It was like, wow, the world's poorest people are the world's richest people on some level. And I experienced such an incredible amount of kindness and kinship and connection. I had conjunctivitis at one point, and a Quechua woman in Peru thrust me into a room, told me to pee in a bucket and put it on my eyes. And I didn't speak much Quechua. I speak Spanish, but not Quechua. And I just trusted her, because I was like, I'm in the middle of nowhere. Like, I was blind. I couldn't see.
I hope that's what she meant.
I hope that's what... Yeah, she was like, pee. She was gesturing. And I did it. And the minute I put the pee on my eyes began to clear. It was incredible. And she told me to do that every time I peed for 3 or 4 days, and it cured my conjunctivitis. And it was just this incredibly powerful realization that we'd lost so much knowledge, and that through that loss of knowledge and connection with the land, we have no choice but to turn to consumerism.
Yeah, to fill that void of
because we need
forgetfulness,
things.
We could call it, because it can be remembered, right?
It can be remembered, yeah. And my work really has turned into that remembering, and that exploration, like that, the delight in really exploring how can we live on this earth in a way that really speaks to the earth and allows the earth to speak to us. And that manifests in lots of different ways for me. And ultimately led me to going off grid when I was 23, which was in itself an incredible, beautiful and excruciating experience, and one that I think about regularly.
So this is off-grid community, off-grid.
I've done off-grid in 3 different settings.
I think because it's a really good conversation, because there's lots of talk and there's lots of people interested or the wanting to go off-grid and live in community.
Yeah.
So someone that's spent time really in that.
Yeah, and I've done it 3 times.
Right?
I've done it in 3 different ways. So I've done it on the sea.
Yeah.
I've done it in community, and I've done it on my own plot of land. So they're 3 very different settings. On the sea was in Cornwall, in Penryn.
Yeah, nice.
Which was beautiful. And with the pirates.
Yeah.
With the pirate people.
Pirates of Penryn.
Pirates of Penryn, Pontcharden. Love that place. was a birthplace really of my sense of community. And, you know, I mean, living by the sea is incredible because of the riches, you know, the fruits of the sea, right? The seaweeds, the mussels, the crab. There's so much, you know, the mackerel, we would go and fish the mackerel, the sandfire. There was so much food along the coast. The abundance of wild food on the coast is incredible and very special. And yeah, you can't. Foraging on land is amazing, but if you're a beginner forager and you really want to see what nature's capable of, you go to the sea because it's mind blowing, and it's kind of unharnessed really in this in the same way as we've harnessed the land.
Yeah.
And then my partner and I at the time, who then became my husband, got really interested in off-grid communities. So we visited Land Matters, Stewart Woodland Community. All these communities are in the southwest and Tinker's Bubble. And sadly, Stewart Woodland is no more. Land Matters continues now near Totnes, and Tinker's Bubble, which has now obtained permanent planning permission. And what came up for us as we were looking, and is a bit of a lesson of mine as well, that we chose Tinker's Bubble because we felt like Tinker's Bubble needed us. So it came from quite an interesting place of seeing a community that had a beautiful set of principles that for whatever reason had struggled to sustain people long term. And we were young and very capable and really wanted to help stabilize a project that we felt was important to exist in the world.
Did it feel quite transient then up until that point? Or?
I mean, it's hard for me to say a place feels transient before I move into it, but they just didn't have high numbers, and it didn't seem like anyone, apart from one or two members, had been there long term. It was almost completely male as well. So it just felt like energetically it needed some support. And at the time as well, I was really attracted to the level of purism because it's no fossil fuels. So you don't use anything that has petrol power on site. So we would fell the trees with axes and saws. We would work heavy horses. We had a steam-powered sawmill to plank up the wood to build our houses. We had milking cows. We grew like 80% of our own food. Did a lot of preserving. My house was cob and wood. Yeah, it was, we reared our own meat, our own eggs. It was a life very much like going back into the past and looking at what a smallholder's life might be like, but in collaboration with others. So it really is an incredible project.
That's fully unplugged, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Except for the Wi-Fi.
Okay.
Yeah, it had Wi-Fi, which I thought was hilarious because there was an ex-tech person who had given up his life in tech and had rigged up Wi-Fi into the community. And I think the signal was better than anywhere I'd ever lived. and it was just so bizarre. But of course, we couldn't use it if the sun wasn't shining, which is when you tend to want to use Wi-Fi, right?
Yeah, you don't want that big pungent light in your eye at night.
So
no.
and iPhones didn't really exist then. Or if they did, we didn't really know about them. So it wasn't... you'd go
typing and swiping. You might have been playing Snake and Tetra.
But there was this board game that all the guys loved to play at night time for like hours and hours on it. But yeah, that was the kind of the pastime of the evening. That and cider.
Yeah. Great space though. That really speaks to when I say unplugged, I mean I get the Wi-Fi, but even then that's not really where we're at today. So
no.
Through today's lens would still be very much unplugged, right?
Yeah, hugely.
Yeah.
Hugely. And if you wanted, I had my daughter in that community. So she was off-grid for the first 6 years of her life, which has been hugely formative for her. And I didn't say it when we were talking, but something that I could really feel in your daughters is something that my daughter had, which is that, and I'm going to try and name something I haven't named before, but there's a level of wide-eyed genuine innocence about the world because we haven't taken it away too young.
Yeah.
You know, they haven't been sat. Look, you know, you haven't placated your daughters with screens just because they're exhibiting some difficult behavior.
Yeah.
And sadly, you lose some level of spirit from a child when you do that to them. Something is eroded. And I could see that that wasn't the case with your kids. And that, unfortunately, is extremely rare.
I know, yeah.
And
I feel that.
You know, my memory is of our children loving spending time together so much that they literally disappeared on the land for hours and hours and hours. And you had to sort of calm me down because I thought something must be wrong when actually they'd just disappeared into their magical world and were just with the trees and the plants and mud and sticks and, you know, dipping their toes in the lake. And they were probably having, I mean, we know they were having one of the best times of their lives because my daughter still is like, are Tony's kids coming? Are Tony's kids coming? And that was how many years ago? Like 5 years ago. And I feel like these spaces for me personally, with the value system that I hold, are sacred. They're sacred places where, you know, Tinker's Bubble is a sacred place because where can you go now to experience a fireside where people just sit in an evening and play music? You know, who's holding those spaces?
Yeah, other than it's cleverly curated or crafted because it's a retreat perhaps or an experience. But then there isn't the consistency within that. And it's, as we know, it's the consistency that leads to the real embodiment.
And nonetheless, powerful spaces as well, I would say, you know, a retreat experience.
Yeah, no, I 100%, because that's an opportunity to step outside the everyday and go, well, instead of the screen, this is what that is trying to fill the void of. This is what's missing again.
And,
you know?
And the flickering fire.
Yeah, like just that.
I was cooking the other day at Buddhafield and I got a very clear message, like the fire being like, you neglected me. Where did you go? And I'm there thinking, well, I'm growing mushrooms and I'm making medicine and like, but I can hear you. I can hear that I have not sat by you. And I can, you know, that kind of like warmth, that glow, that community hearth is so important. That piece is so important to light fire and be around fire together. And I'm only just realizing that, you know, when I inoculate mushroom logs, I always light the fire, but I could totally plug in an electric hob to melt the wax, but I don't. I always light the fire. And it was only the other day when I was cooking again in a festival space that I realized that the fire is a really important relationship. And actually the fire can replace the phone. Like it can hold the same sort of space of sitting, like when we're tired, sitting, relaxing and looking at the flickering flame. And it does something. It's got a very soothing, it has the effect that we're actually looking for when we're tired and we're looking at the phone.
Yeah.
You know, the phone stimulates or can feed the feeling of I'm not enough or someone else, look at what someone else is doing. It's amazing.
End up tired and wired in that state.
Yeah.
Whereas the fire is actually, we're receiving something so much more than that, aren't we? And then put more people around that fire and then we are really healing the social wound, I would say.
Yeah. And I found, as someone who I'm very sensitive, I struggle to be in a festival because I can feel so much. I sometimes receive information that I don't want to receive. And I find it difficult to just be around that many people, you know, particularly if we're doing things that are kind of expansive or, you know.
All the energies of that.
Creates a focal point that takes it away from, it just creates that softness. My gaze is over here. And this little conversation that's happening here is just part of this bigger experience that we're having of being by the fire. So it sort of holds a level of attention and energy, which then softens the personal interaction, doesn't make it so personal in a way. It kind of holds the community. The fire is holding the community on some level.
I guess it could be a little like with the understanding of the food, like returning more and more to the land, we can start to tune in more and more to receiving from the land. And then more and more that can be like a self-medicating process of what we might need to receive from the land to heal us.
100%.
And the fire can become that the more we go to it. Perhaps there's being an element in that the more we sit with it, the more we can have that understanding of it medicating us.
As you were saying that, I was getting goose pimples.
You know, to say it feels like that. Because again, I speak to this a lot about animals having this ability to self-medicate, and to the point dogs will eat poo, right? Because for their microbiome, but they are self-medicating in a way.
Yes.
Right? Whereas we were speaking earlier, we've basically been pulled away from that through, and over time, even more manipulated food systems that are highly palatable. More and more processed, the more and more manipulated, the further away we get from the understanding of how to self-medicate. It could be salts, fats, and then whatever else they could be fortified with. So there is that, isn't there? And I realized earlier, and I said, it takes a long time to get to that point of being embodied. But I think that it's almost like you go through that process, and for you, for instance, means that then for others to learn from you means they don't have to go through all of that.
Yeah.
You've almost gone, well, okay, here's the 20% input for 80% output, rather than here's 80% of the fluff for 20% input, output, input. Yes, you get it.
Yeah, and it's not linear either.
Yeah.
So I've gone through cycles of going away from myself and it being really painful and not really understanding. I said to someone the other day, I feel like I'm going back to my roots. And they were like, you are your roots. You know, for me, it's happened now that the people that I've taught are now becoming teachers. And I actually saw my apprentice from here years ago, and he's now leading a very important land movement in the Judaism religion, right? And he's really advocating for earth-based spirituality within Judaism. And he was saying how it was actually very sweet. He was like, having you as my mentor was amazing. And whatever difficulty there was around that time, you know, I feel so blessed to have had your time. And I'd not had that feedback. And this is kind of 7 years or whatever. This is years later, at least 5 years later. And now he's holding a very important light. And I guess what I know is that truthfully, each of us will have a different expression of what it means to be in harmony with the earth. And I've realized now that I can teach someone, you can eat this pine resin, or you can make this mushroom medicine, or you can grow mushrooms, or you can grow sea buckthorn, and there's all this abundance. But ultimately, if your role in this world is to be in policy in the UN, then that's your unique expression of holding your light. And I'm here to help people navigate their themselves as nature and what it really means to really know nature, including ourselves as part of, and to live that in the most beautiful, fullest and truest expression of that, knowing that you have plant allies, mushroom allies, ancestral allies, and that it's all there for you. Because when we come from that place, that's wholeness, that's completeness. And so that may express in many different ways. So the longer I teach, the more I'm able to kind of not feel attached to where people take the skills, because the learning isn't in just the skills. There's a lot bigger thing going on, but it's not tangible. It's alignment.
What came up for me is like the word biodiversity again there, right? Because we think of maybe biodiversity like the biodiversity of the soil or the plants, but that's so nuanced again. You know, if we went biodiversity, what about interdependence? And to think if that's everything, inclusive of that. So there is the individual role within that. And then there's what within that, all those kingdoms and the ancestral, what is it that individual would need to then heal, and how nuanced that could even be, right? But thinking about the biodiversity piece, so if we went again to the timeline of green revolution, industrial revolution, farming. Depends where we are, right? 10,000 years or 6,000 years in the UK, would it be, do you think?
When farming started?
Yeah, in the UK, where would you...
in the UK... How many years ago? Well, I was looking, I've got worldwide, because my specialism is more in the mushroom kingdom.
Yeah, okay.
When it is believed that mushroom farming started in 600 AD.
Okay.
So, but in the kind of more industrial method, it was much younger. So it depends what type of farming as well.
So in my head, I have like if we were to say, let's go back just hunter-gatherer, say 200,000 years, and then somewhere in that 10,000 year to 6,000 year geographic location, then as we're coming closer and closer to what then becomes an industrial revolution, it becomes more and more mechanical. So we understand that, well, firstly, the biodiversity piece, or the understanding of who we are on an interdependent scale as the hunter-gatherer 200,000 years ago. Then more of the manipulation of those systems come in when we start farming. So the biodiversity piece and the I comes into the independent comes into the interdependent model. And then as that timeline and where we are today, like the biodiversity piece, what we're lacking right now. And through regenerative farming, we understand, yes, we're looking at this regeneration of the soil to help the biodiversity of the soil. But where I believe this conversation is more on that cusp of almost like the hunter-gatherer foraging, hunting, foraging, then into on the cusp of farming. Like
that's the I would call that wild tending.
Wild tending. So I have this, like, I much prefer wild tending, so thank you, I'm going to use that now. I had like hunter agriculturalist kind of Yeah.
So I'm
wild
fascinated.
Tending.
Yes, I'm fascinated by this time, and I'm actually considering doing a PhD on it at the moment.
Brilliant.
Because, being from a Central American, part Central American lineage, I take a lot of my learnings from North America, because native North Americans have been really good at writing things down in the recent 100 years. Whereas in Central America, we have not. So there's very little for me to actually learn from places like Nicaragua, who've been less colonized, right? So there's just less of a kind of, things are still passed down orally, largely. So, you have amazing writers. I'm sure Robin Wall Kimmer, for example, who speaks a lot about the interactions we have with nature. And she doesn't really kind of go very deeply into wild tending, but essentially what she talks about is how harvesting can enhance nature's capacity to give. And something that I've become increasingly aware of in this country is we've fallen in love with rewilding, which I think is really beautiful. And I'm absolutely not poo-pooing it, right? But if we are advocates of rewilding, whilst we are going to Tesco's for our food, we're doing one thing with one hand and one thing with another.
Yeah.
And until we can truly bring these conversations together, then we're going to be pulling in different directions. And again, the movement is split.
We're out of alignment.
In my opinion.
Yeah. And as the individual doing that, it's like, as soon as you say that, I'm like, I went to Waitrose the other day because it's all I could get to. But although I went to the organic aisle, but yeah, I still did that. And yet at the same breath, I'm putting a podcast out about wild tending. Yeah. You feel out of alignment when you hear it. That the honesty piece is, maybe it was out of alignment there.
And it's something that I do value about the world that I feel like I'm part of now, which is if we shame each other for not being perfect or making a choice for them in the moment, then what we're not doing is turning our attention to the bigger conversation or the kind of how do we really address this truly and deeply in a bigger way? How does regenerative farming or how does wild tending come back onto the table, and how can we live lives that are more integrated with nature? Because we're now living in a time where people are being prescribed nature time, right?
Yeah.
And they may be going out and sitting in woodlands, taking off their shoes and socks, which is incredibly beautiful. But what if there were bigger structures to hold, well, come and pick blackberries for the community larder, or come and help, milk the cows today, or come and help, weed the garden. And there was a bigger movement towards people being able to have a life where they might be on the laptop 3 days a week, but they might be on a farm 1 day a week, or in a forest garden. And what would that really look like? Because for sure, I've been in land since I was 23. I'm 38 now, so for over 15 years, and more and more and more people are seeking that connection. And more, you only need to taste the food to know that there's a huge nutritional difference between something that's in mass industrially produced and something that's been grown on a soil near you by someone who's not mega scale. It doesn't need to be teeny tiny, it can be medium, but that kind of, you can pick the fruit that much riper, therefore it's sat in the sun, therefore it's developed more vitamins. It's so interesting. The quality difference is immeasurable. It's incredible, actually.
Well, it's a little like, I imagine there's the love piece in this, because there is a difference again, if eating food that's been prepared by someone that's preparing it with love versus eating food, it could be the same ingredients even, versus someone that's giving you it is like, really resent the fact I'm cooking you dinner right now.
Yeah.
The energy would be different within those foods
yes,
that you're consuming.
completely.
So again, like even that, someone that's harvesting, let's say, because they're plugged into community, they're also their physical, social, spiritual needs met. So they're in emotional, they're harmonized those, so they have emotional well-being because their needs are met rather than there being scarcity. And that will be felt and ingested.
Yes.
Yeah.
Part of it would be
not just the soil, but actually,
not just the soil. I think it's important to say it's isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the soil and all of the pluses. I used to live with someone at the community called Mike, and I really love sharing his quotes. He did get spoken about at Oxfordville Farming last year. And Mike was a very wise man. He lived largely without money most of his life, and he was the son of a tea planter. And he had lots of wise sayings about land. And he used to say that firewood would give you warmth 3 times. Once when you collect it, once when you cut it, and once when you burn it.
Yeah.
And I would say that food, wild tending, foraging, or farming is exactly the same. You receive a lot when you're growing, you receive a lot when you're cooking, and you receive a lot when you're eating. And then you can give back, essentially. Like, in my opinion, the piece that is often missing is, where does our feces go? Where does that nutrition then go back into the system again? Because, for me, that's true sustainability, is if we have a whole process that then feeds back into the land, that is a forever possible cycle that we can be part of. And it's very powerful.
To grasp that, isn't it? But I think with that, let food be thy medicine piece. The Nat Life Pod is a platform for conversation to help close the gap between wellness as an industry and wellness as a state of being. This is also what underpins our online community, the Nat Life Tribe. The Nat Life Tribe is a growing health and natural lifestyle community where we offer weekly natural movement sessions, breathwork sessions, and hold a check-in safe space for the community to share, connect, and raise a hand if help is needed. This is a great space to embody the practices that we often speak to on the Nat Life Pod. Full details on how to join the Nat Life Tribe are in the show notes. I hope to see you moving, breathing, and sharing in there real soon. I've spoken about this I'm going to say it again because I just love this piece of Isabella Tree's Nep Estate. And going back to like the hunter horticulturalist almost, but she would say, they have these incredible roaming ancient breeds moving around on the land, right? And horticulturists can speak to this, whereas if you trim a rose bush, the rose bush will grow back thicker, right?
Yes.
But with those ruminating animals that she's observed, because there's salivary enzymes on that plant, the plant grows back at a much more fast and thicker rate, right? And so
there's a conversation happening between the enzymes.
Yes, the enzymes of the animal
and the plant.
The plant, and then the soil, like photosynthesis of that, and then the soil then communicating with the plant. The plant then gives the animal when it comes back again. So that's a whole cycle that we just...
Because they've evolved together.
Yeah, so if we put the human into that piece, like... And I spoke of this before. We had a tree in our house in Cornwall, right? There was a tree there, and we had no idea what the tree was, right? It's completely bare and looked like it was dying, really. And we had a guy that would come along and he'd look after some of the woodland, and the conversation was, what's that tree, Jeff? And he said, oh, it's an apple tree, but it hasn't had apples on it for, I think it was like 10 years or 15 years. I can't remember. Anyway, large number of years since the old lady died in the house.
Mm.
And he said there was an Eastern European like folk tale, or whatever we want to call that, was that when children start playing underneath the tree, the apples will come back, or whatever the fruit would be. And we had apples, right? And Tallulah and Bowman specifically, they're the ones, they would play underneath the tree. I mean, Tallulah was like, yeah, I think it's because we peed under their pupper. But the point being, even the pee would be, maybe the apples, then that's what the tree communicates, and the apples give Tallulah what she needs. I really firmly believe there's a communication piece that's missing.
Yes.
And then it's like, what is that for us? There's our salivary enzymes. There would be sweat from our glands coming into the soil with our hands. Must be a communication there. Mm. What about if we're peeing and pooing on our land?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, there's quite a strong movement in small scale farmers and producers that use pee.
Yeah.
But not so much feces. However, I have learned that the main sort of, I can't remember what the word is, something plant. It's like a waste plant. Mm-hmm. They do sell night soil, and night soil is human feces that has been made safe. So it's still happening in this country that you can buy human feces that's been sterilized, which you can then put back onto your soil. So it's actually not as not happening as we think.
Well, I imagine if you have a compost loo and you have a number of compost loos and it's your small holding, then that's in that whole network anyway, right?
Yeah, I mean, you need to make sure that the feces gets up to a certain temperature in order to kill the pathogens. So when we were doing it on our small holding, we had to measure the temperature of the heap to know that it was safe to grow vegetables. Because of the stigma around it, we used it on the upper parts. So our small holding was on a slope. And so, logic says if you put something nutritious at the top of the slope, it's going to eventually leach down, right? And because of the stigma around using human feces, and we were running a farm shop, we chose to put the night soil up on the top of the slope, just above the fruit bushes. And then it would feed the fruit bushes, and then eventually it would feed the veg patch, which was down right by the house, because that was the most logical thing to do, was to have the veg that needed a lot of tending near the house, and then the fruit further away, and then the animals beyond that. And that was a really good system. And, I would recommend it, but you just need to make sure that you're measuring the heat of your heap. But anybody who's had horses knows that if you heap up the dung from horses onto a pile, it literally gives off an incredible amount of heat in that digestion process. It's amazing.
It's going to be a hard one for people to digest, that one, isn't it?
Yeah.
For sure. I can just feel someone on their car journey now. It's like, now the shit talk started.
Yeah.
But again, it's quite powerful. Okay, so foraging versus wild tending.
Yeah, I was about to say, should we talk about wild tending? Yeah. So it's something that I've thought a lot about and read a lot about. And, as someone who is wheat intolerant, I'm part Central American, right? A lot of Central Americans don't tolerate wheat well. They don't tolerate lactose well. I had Dexter cows, and Shetlands are very similar. If anybody, keeps animals, there's these breeds of cows that are sort of older. They're more ancient, more akin Highland cattle as well. Their genetics are older.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then you have cows like the Holstein or the Frisian cow, where the genetics, they've been bred with the sole focus of having high yields in milk.
Yeah.
And I'm not a scientist, so I'm going to try and explain this as well as I can, knowing that it might not be slightly imperfect, but the core message is true, which is essentially the nutrient makeup of the milk changed during that time.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense. A bit like genetically modifying something. It has to, right?
It is a little bit like genetically modifying it, but we're doing it through breeding rather than in a lab. And so essentially, what once was A1 milk became A2, which meant that the lactose was much higher. Similar thing happened with wheat, okay? We, want to produce for mass. There's a population boom. And so we start messing with wheat in order to get higher yields, and then start going away from things like kamut or spelt, which have older genetics. And then the gluten starts going up and up and up and up and up. Then we start doing things like, well, we've got loads of this cheap wheat, right? Like, let's put it in meals that wouldn't normally have it in to bulk them up, to make people feel full. When they think they might be eating a curry, which might be a vegetable curry, we're going to put loads of wheat in there. They're going to feel much fuller. Then we, start eating ready meals all of the time because we're all so busy, because we're trying to earn a living. And then suddenly we're ingesting bread for breakfast, bread for lunch, and bread for dinner, essentially, or wheat. And so what I'm interested in, or what I'm sensing as someone who's holding a lot of herbal knowledge, is that we have now created a diet that will kill us. Because our bodies are not designed to eat this type of high gluten diet, and we're not designed to eat the high lactose, let alone the high sugars, the high salts, the vegetable fats, right? So a system that we have designed, and very understandably designed, to feed the masses. It's a very natural human instinct to want to create food for the masses. That's, there's no judgment on what has happened, right? But essentially we've not evolved to eat this, and therefore we are getting sick on a much larger scale. So, through my wanderings and learnings as a smallholder and as a forager, is actually becoming extremely interested in this moment pre-industrial, where we were producing food that was, just one step beyond the wild ancestor, just that, or even is the wild ancestor, but is in a production methodology. And so that's the work that I call wild tending, or tending the wild. And we've been doing that here and developing that knowledge and understanding for the last 7 years with huge success at 42 acres. I mean, I'm struggling to find a project that has not been successful, because wild food wants to grow itself. So I often refer to myself as a lazy farmer, because I just plant stuff or inoculate stuff and it grows. And I'm not doing this. I look at I've been part of the Land Workers Alliance organisational groups, and I was involved in the early days, and we'd visit all of these market gardeners, and they're all working extremely hard to grow lettuce and vegetables and tomatoes, and having to build polytunnels, so having to build these artificial environments in order to grow all of this food. And I'm just kind of waking up on a Monday going, well, I've got 100 people to feed, so I'm going to pick nettle tips. And then suddenly I've got crates and crates and crates of nettles. And then about now, so I was driving here and I was going, oh, it's time for nettle seed. It's time for nettle seed. So I'm thinking, okay, so I need to get my buckets and I need to organise a team, and we're going to go out and harvest loads of nettle seed. None of that work to, weed, prepare the soil. It's all just there. But then one step beyond that is the sea buckthorn. So the sea buckthorn, which is just, in the field, 2 fields over from here, is now going orange. We planted 4,000 sea buckthorn trees about 2 or 3 years ago, and it's about to fruit. And the only thing that we did with the trees is to prune them, which took about a day in kind of January time. And, sea buckthorn is a pioneer plant. We did obviously we did need to bring them in, but they're essentially naturalizing here and will naturally spread, whilst also building nitrogen into the soil. And sea buckthorn is such an interesting plant because this is what we used to have. This was our source of vitamin C. This is our native indigenous source of vitamin C.
And this is the stuff I love, Tasha.
Nobody knows about it.
Yeah.
How does nobody know about this? And it's because it is labour intensive to pick.
Perceived as, or is?
No, it is labour intensive compared to how cheap someone in Africa is or someone in South America is to pick a lemon. It's cheaper for me to use that person and to use fossil fuels to import it and squeeze a lemon into my hummus than it is for me to buy a bottle of sea buckthorn in this country. And that's only because we are building off the back of colonization and because we're building off the back of cheap fossil fuels.
Yeah. Yeah. Jess spoke to this about, Ibiza being a real example during COVID because they had this realization that 96% of the food was being imported and they only grew a small amount on this tiny island, right? And then it doesn't matter where you are because the island has the polarities, right? Either has extreme wealth or on the other complete opposite scale of that, right? But then it doesn't matter who you are if
you don't
there's
have
no food and you're not producing anything, food can't get in. So then there's driven by scarcity almost that it inspired them to start what is their regenerative movement there.
Yes.
But equally all around the globe, what if, we often speak to that in our circles. What would you, or when? What are you going to do when you can't fly or ship anything in? What would you do? What are you going to survive on? So when people have food labels or whatever they choose to say, I'm a this and I'm a that, rather than I'm Tony and you're Tasha. What do I need because I'm a self-medicating species? It might be something completely different in this moment to what it was earlier that I might need. But at the moment I put myself under a label, it's like, well, how are you gonna survive if you can't get that here? You can't supplement, you can't do this. So what are you going to do? Where are you going to get it? So this conversation is amazing for that because
it's important as well. So
know that we can support that.
I'll be really honest and say, for me, if this movement is born out of survivalist mentality, it won't go to where it could go.
Okay.
For me.
Yeah.
So, and the reason why I say that is because for me, it's born out of love for the land and love for myself and the planet and other people. It's born out of love. And for me, working on land is a deep privilege, an honor, and a celebration. And for me, helping people get the medicine they need, working with the ecosystem to produce native strains of mushrooms or to grow native strains of vitamin C like the sea buckthorn is like a deep privilege. And it's something that I do because I deeply love it and not because I'm afraid of how to survive. Because if I was doing that, then I would be into self-sufficiency. And having explored self-sufficiency, it's that thing of interdependency and over being an island for me. For me. And I feel like, as time goes on, I become more of a teacher and a knowledge holder and also doing more work. It was a complete surprise to me that so many sick people are coming to me now for help, like really sick people, really wanting medicine from the land. Like it's interesting that it's not good enough for quite a large swathe of people now to just buy a reishi click from Amazon. Like it's not enough anymore.
Yeah, that was
people are seeing
first
through it.
Step on the ladder.
People are seeing through that, and so people are seeking out individual kind of medicine holders who have that connection with land because that's really where the potency is. And so for me, as I increasingly become a maker of medicine, if I'm worrying about where my bread's coming from, I'm then going to start growing wheat, and then I'm going to start growing potatoes, and then I'm going to start working from a survivalist perspective. And don't get me wrong, I think that's an important piece in the conversation, but we really need, for me, it's so important to cultivate love, just love for life. Because what I'm talking about essentially is like a pro-life movement, like vitality, wellness, community. And so if we're all trying to do everything, on our own, we will fail. Like there's no, but that's just my personal, that's what's fed me, I think, is just like knowing that I need to keep doing what I love, what I can hear, what is my song, what is my piece in all of this. And there are some people whose piece in it is self-sufficiency and the knowledge around self-sufficiency. And I would just say that it's not the whole piece.
I guess it's plugging. How do people find the communities? Because we talk of privilege, right? So it's a privilege to be able to sit here in this space on this
100%.
land, and to wild tend this land.
100%.
And people want to plug into communities and networks. It's like, how do we support those that are doing it? And how do we get involved in wild tending, I guess?
Yeah. So I would say, I've just been to an amazing gathering organised by Shared Assets on land justice. And there were some amazing people, particularly in our BPOC group, that are holding like female leaders of land-based projects in London. And I felt like, having been partly from a displaced ethnic minority myself, if I'd had a community garden where I could go and actually have my hands in the soil and meet other people producing food and able to take a squash back to my family and cook it up, So there are amazing community projects that are very much alive. There's also a forest garden in Teddington. So there's little projects, you don't need a lot of land to do this on. It's incredible what can happen, whether it's the connection piece or the medicinal piece, and even within a veggie plot. Like I'm doing wild tending on a larger scale, in collaboration with 42 Acres. Whereas, even if you have like a teeny tiny patch of grass on your council estate, I've got a picture of me harvesting tons of rose hips in London to bring back here to process because these rose bushes had just gone mental and they had these absolutely plush fat rose hips on them because the concrete around was heating up so much from the sun. It was creating a particular hot ecosystem that had allowed them to flourish. So, and sea buckthorn grew on my estate, by the way, which I didn't even realize until many years later. I went back and was like, hold on, there's sea buckthorn here. I was around it this whole time. How interesting. Because I have a very strong connection with it. But I didn't know. I'd never eaten them and never noticed them particularly. And, so it's absolutely possible to do this type of work on teeny tiny pockets of land. And actually there's tons of blackberries, and it's just a case of kind of going, oh, well, this blackberry bush is producing huge blackberries, so I might take a cutting of it, which costs barely anything. So you just cut it in the winter, put it in a pot, and suddenly it's going to sprout because blackberries grow up to 2 meters or 2 feet, I think, in the summer.
Wow.
And then you plant it somewhere where you kind of want it to be. And, I'm a real advocate of guerrilla gardening. Like if there's a bit of land and it's near your house and, it's public and no one's using it, then what's the harm in whacking something that you're going to eat in a few years in there? And actually, if we all took a little bit more of that kind of, we belong to the land and the land belongs to us, I think magical things can happen. And it doesn't need to be in a taking kind of way. It's that relationship that we can start to build. And I've always found with my life, through being absolutely clear that I have a deep relationship with the land, and that is my sovereign right. And I found it fascinating, the doors that have been opened to me because I exercise that right. And then people say, well, it's so unusual to be in that space. And then people go, well, we'd love to have you on this land. So in all the scenarios of my life, I have not owned land. I have never owned land. I do not own land. And yet somehow land finds me.
Yeah.
So somebody did say to me, it's all very well to talk like this, Tasha, but, you're very privileged to have all this access. And I'm like, okay, I hear you and I hear the pain, and I said, look, I hear, because she was a woman whose family had also fled war, right? So it was interesting because it was a very similar resonant pain that I have too. where you grow up knowing that your family wanted to be at home and they weren't, right?
Yeah.
And that they may have lost status and power and money through that horrible, painful process.
Yeah, you feel the trauma of it.
Yeah, it's trauma, right?
Yeah.
And I said, I totally hear you. And I had no money when I worked on land. I just knew that that's what I had to do. And, you know, for better or for worse, I knew that if I pursued a life in an office, I would get sick and die. I just knew. So, you know, for me, it wasn't a choice because I felt like it was that or basically death. And I just followed what I knew was home and true for me, and doors opened up. And I feel like, you know, we all have a natural ability to wild to tend. Like it's a very natural thing to do, to get seeds from something you like, pick them and sprinkle them somewhere. Like these are not, it's important. Like I'm honing the skills through a lifetime of practice, but the very initial steps of it are super easy and simple and beautiful and evolved from instinct. And when I teach, and I think it's something we have in common, is when I teach, I really try and get people to feel their own instinct, because these are things that all of us carry in our DNA, embedded in our DNA, is how to produce food or medicine. It's like right in there. So I often will just shout out questions when I'm teaching, like, how would this mushroom respond to this wood over this wood? Like, don't think, tell me. Yeah. And often it'll be the right one because it's in there somewhere. So for me, if we allow this reignition, I suppose, of this knowledge to happen, I found it quite fascinating what is possible from that place, over kind of thinking, right, well, I've got to start a project and I can't start a project until I get a bit of land, and I've got to buy a bit of land, and then you put all these blocks in the way.
Obstacles, right? Yeah. I felt that.
Yeah, I bet you have. Yeah. I bet you have, because we're conditioned to think that we have to own it or rent it. And it goes deeper than that. You know, mycelial roots do not care where they go. They go where the nutrition is. And once we really start to embody the wisdom that the plants and the mushrooms and the animals can really carry, we can feel into go where the nutrition is, like go where is open to you, and see what happens, and keep following that, and see what happens, and keep following it, and see what happens. And sometimes it may be very, very difficult, but sometimes it won't be. Sometimes it could be really beautiful as well.
That is beautiful. How many doors can we open up? Or can we get to a position where we don't perceive a door even? Yeah, we've very much had that we need to own it, buy the land. But I love that piece where it's just finding something. Have you read Edible Garden? So that space, it's called, I'm sure the book's called The Edible Garden. I don't know the author right now. It doesn't come to mind. But that's in the city in London, and what you can forage, you know? So I was at my parents' at the weekend. They're in Norfolk, not London, but my mum's magnolia tree in the garden. Look, Tony, it's flowering again. And it's huge. And I said, you can put those on your salads, right? And so
they're amazing.
Yeah, they got like a ginger pep to them, right?
Yeah.
So again, it's like but isn't it? That book, if anyone's, interested in this, like The Edible Garden, and what that could possibly do as well for us, to think that you can walk around a city and forage like that, what that could do for a food system, the care that could be taken into that.
And I think that wild tending piece, a really amazing herbalist that I work with said to me, I was saying, we could do a whole map of Froome. I was saying we could map it all. There's something that we've done here is we've mapped and documented all the plants, and there's still many more to do, but we've got a bank of knowledge from this land. Yeah. And I was saying, let's do it for Froome. Like, how amazing. We could go around Froome and go, this magnolia tree here can be do that. These nettles here can do da-da-da-da-da. Here are the recipes. Here are the spots. Like, remember, pick above the level where, dogs can pee or poo, because that's not good. And just give those things. And they said to me, Tasha, you need to be careful with this, because if we plot this on a map, people are going to go and rape it, basically. They're going to go and over harvest, and it will be gone, and then it will be ruined and it will be lost. And you will have been the one that did that. And I was like,
how did that fit?
Wow. Like all my childlike wonder of this is how I
the
could.
The romantic idea of it, right? Yeah.
I felt really slapped down in that moment. And I welcome, this is why I have friends like I do, because, they're really thinking about this and they've got some experience of it. And that's why, again, right, it's interesting why I wouldn't see that. Because for me, coming from a place of abundance,
yes,
why would you take everything? Why would you not leave at least a third, if not 2/3? Because for me, nature is so abundant that, of course, there's more than enough.
Yeah, it is a process, again, a bit like we spoke about rewilding and rechilding or what labels we can create, but there is a rewilding process of the human for us to go from scarcity to abundance.
Exactly.
And that can be a huge process for some, depending on how big the wound is and what the family story is and what the family system is, right? To be able to get to a point where you would just view it and go, I'll just take enough.
Yeah.
What I need, rather than maybe what I want to do is just annihilate that bush right now, but I'll leave some for toilet rolls in an aisle. Yeah. Classic example.
Exactly. And I think that's where time and time again now I come back to, I need to hold the knowledge and the love of wild tending. Because if we start to cultivate a perspective around how we can be active agents to grow and produce our food and medicine, then we're not just foragers anymore. We're tending the wild, we're caretakers, and it shifts that perspective.
Yeah, I love that. I've spoken of this before as well, but Bruce Parry, in To Why, and the one that blows my mind more than anything, it was originally the Penang, but every time I go back to that, I watch that documentary a lot because there's so much in it that you go, aha. It's a bit like going out into the woodland, the consistency, and we go, aha, it's speaking to me in a different way today. What medicine? But within that was the Parai, and how they only have the moment. They don't have a word for future or past. And that the forest, nature, is speaking through them, right? And they get subtle messages or whatever from spirit, I think they call it, right? The spirits. But then they started farming. So because they had to, and they no longer get the messages. And you feel that's devastating, right? You can feel that because that's happened so quickly, whereas we've had, how long's this process been to get to the point where we want to take all the toilet rolls off the shelf, right?
Yeah, we've internalized the pain.
Yeah, whereas it's an internal state. You can actually see what it is in when these people are communicating it. The pain is a reminder then of what our wound is. Do you know what I mean? That's what you get to see, because it's happened so rapidly for them. But that's interesting because that, again, is in a way they are wild tending. It's like even the Amazon, right? There has been a wild tending there. There's been.
I know, I've experienced it.
It's not like it just is just growing. There is a custodian or a caregiver, right?
Yeah.
Because it is reciprocity there, right?
Yeah, and I think that's, as someone who's been part of farming, small scale farming movements, I always struggled with the word farming. Like so much of what I come to understand, I'm like, oh, that thing there, why did that sit oddly? Or why, what was going on there? And I'll sort of look at it later and I'll go, yeah, I suppose because farming's come out of this kind of like almost, the word, it feels like taking rather than tending. It's one step. And I think it's possibly as well, like as a woman, it feels born through patriarchy, whereas rather than caretaking.
Yeah, nurturing.
And when I can hold that space of that's, what I am, then that feels more aligned with my energy. And it's a much, I had the situation where someone from a very well-known, very popular farm education establishment came here and just said to me, where's all the food? publicly as well. He was making a point, in front of another group of farmers. Where's all the food? It's all very well to talk about this or that, but where is it? And he was standing in 1,500 of my mushroom logs, and he just couldn't see it. And that farm has produced something like 2 tons of mushrooms in the last year. But he just can't see it, because this method of farming is so akin to nature itself that it's almost indistinguishable from nature itself. So how does a modern farmer understand that? How does, and it's, that's for me, that's the uncomfortable work of like being someone that does step into that farming space and own those titles of food producer and medicine producer, and actually speak from the place of feminine leadership. It's not comfortable. Well, and it's not just feminine leadership, it's like feminine mixed race indigenous leadership. And it's, I know part of why increasingly I'm like, stand up and talk about what you do is because it's much more comfortable for me to stay silent, because this voice is a minority voice, and it's hard to explain how to soften and be a caretaker. And when nature produces more than enough, that is when we take. And what would that look like? And it's, rather than saying, I have the answer, which is what we're all looking for, right? We, in our Western minds, we've got a problem.
Fix it.
Yeah. We've got a problem, climate change, over-consumerism, sickness. We've got a problem, let's fix it. Yeah. And instead of like, actually, this is more subtle, it's slower. It means meeting the quietness, which means meeting the pain, and doing the work of showing up and seeing what happens. And
the patience within that.
Huge amounts of patience. The sea buckthorn was planted 4 or 5 years ago, and it's got its first tiny crop on it. And I'm just so grateful that I get to see that. I get to witness that, And it's this thing that we were discussing about the human constellation, so much comes up. So we are so limited, really, but only through our human incapacities. And there's so much potential at this time for deepening and widening our capacities, and sitting with all kinds of iterations really around how we gather to work with land and work with nature. It's really, for me, it's a really exciting time.
I think it's, I am so with you, because I feel that there's the unique gifts and talents around that fire. Go back to the fire earlier. So for me, with the foraging piece, for instance, and I'd observe people foraging and in rubberized boots and like clumping around over the land, and like just with no level of sensitivity or the sensory awareness of what could be expressed through their physicality. Because again, there's like the 200,000 years hunter-gatherer. What did that look like moving through that landscape versus the zoo human post-industrial boom, 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 expressing themselves, no judgment, but expressing themselves through the land that way. So for me, my unique voice around the fire is very much, we have to rewild the human expression within that environment, so that it's not like, oh, quick, everyone hide, here comes the humans. And then you don't get to hear the animals, you don't get to hear the buzz of the bees, you don't get to hear the plants possibly saying, come and pick me, this is what you need right now, Whereas I think that human element of it is the expression of us is so important to rewild that. That feels like my work is that's my communication around the fire,
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
And when you bring that together as like an experience, like we did on the retreat, right? Because to unpack the retreat, it's like, I'm going to take everyone to blindfold them, and I'll get the shoes and socks off, and I'll walk them around, and I'll drop them off different locations around the lake. And they had to just get into their breath. So it was like taking them back to that moment I had at the lake when, I forget what they were like weasels, I think. They were right in front of me, and they were like having a proper conversation, and they had a kind of bit of a standoff, and then they flew off again, ran off. And then there was a moment then again, then they came back again. And I had a moment, I was like, oh my God, came in the doing brain. And in that moment, they were off. But in the moment of the presence, the no future, no past, parai kind of concept of just being, they were having a proper communication in front of me. So just giving the people around the lake a little bit of that, the sensitivities and subtleties, and by being rather than doing, that you felt as a very different group that had been delivered back, right? So there's that
dropping right in,
drop right in, you know. So there is all of us getting around the table in that communication, right?
And I think the piece that you hold is almost like, in a sense, people can get very caught into their heads with the plants and the mushrooms and the techniques and this kind of skill piece. And like, as I'm talking to you, I'm like, oh yeah, you teach them more kind of like, how are we meeting the very basic things of breath, movement, feet on the ground, bum on the earth. Like, and I love when you hold an event and you always lower the table. I love that about what you bring. And actually, I would love to see everyone sitting on the floor all the time, because that's what my body likes to do, you know? And I think, yeah, that's, in a way, we're holding a very similar space with a different inroad.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of spaces like this that we're sitting in, like the Be the Earth experience that was on recently. It is about bringing, I think, honoring, I guess it is interdependence again, you know, allowing the full expression of that.
Yeah.
And it's a good place for harvesting that here, I feel.
Oh, it's amazing. A meeting of many different worlds, yet all working with similar intentions and expressed in very different ways.
Yes, so right now I want to learn about wild tending, and I want Tasha to teach me. And how do I find you, and what does that look like?
So I hold winter medicine making this winter or late autumn, and I also do medicinal mushrooms. But I would say that I'm currently writing next year's courses, and you can probably already hear the title of my newer course, which will be on wild tending, inner and outer journey. So
an inner and outer journey. That's nice.
And so you will find them through the 42 Acres website, because I'm Land, Food and Medicine, the organisation that I hold, is now in partnership, and we run from 42 Acres. Or you can follow me on Instagram at Land, Food and Medicine, where all of the courses that will be newly launched will be announced. And we also have www.landfoodmedicine.com coming in September.
I think it's a book.
I have started writing.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I have. I am very blessed. I have a partner who is an incredible illustrator, and he's just been commissioned to do the first part of a graphic novel. And when I saw his work, it just landed in such a different way. I was struggling with words being more limited for me. So I'm feeling into whether or not it's actually wants to be a graphic novel about wild tending and my journey. But I'm just sat with this, or the possibility of a PhD, and what is the highest kind of expression of what we do. It feels at the moment there are lots of doors open, and it's kind of just making sure that I'm really listening. So I'm not rushing. I'm just listening to see what emerges.
Well, lots of people listening to you right now, which is nice.
Yeah, it's nice. Thank you for having me. Great to have
conversations like this in many ears, I believe. Still loving the holly, actually.
Are you?
The caffeine holly conversation. Yeah. What else did we have here? Horsetail.
Horsetail, very high in silica. The oldest DNA of any plant on the earth. It's amazing, amazing plant. A lot of gardeners can't stand horsetail, or I call it puzzle grass, but it's an interesting one.
It looks like a little bit like a hairy asparagus.
It does, yes. And actually you can peel it and eat it like asparagus. The Japanese in famine pickle it. They pickle the young shoots, and it actually is kind of delicious, salty and light.
Thank you, Tasha.
You're very welcome.
So great to have you here.
Yeah, it's been really fun.
I love spending time with you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks.
Have a hug.
Yeah.
As always, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you feel drawn to do so, then please subscribe to the show, leave a review, and don't forget to share. Sharing is caring. It really helps me to help others. If you're drawn to immersing yourself in any of the Nat Life experiences, or see yourself as a Nat Life coach, head to tonyriddle.com for details of how to immerse yourself in the community. You can follow my adventures on Instagram at The Natural Lifestylist. Big shout out to Simon from We Are the Clarks for producing, filming, editing. Much love.